That day remains vivid in my mind, the moment when it all began. The afternoon stretched lazily before me as I lounged on the couch, aimlessly scrolling through my phone in a bid to pass the time. I found myself without any plans, just a blank slate in my thoughts. I had just returned from the gym and was attempting to savor my day off. The doorbell chimed unexpectedly, catching me off guard. My heart raced at the sight of Patrick, my closest companion. Patrick and I had been acquainted for many years. We stood by one another, unwavering in every circumstance. He was among the rare individuals I could rely on entirely, yet on that particular day, he appeared changed. His typical bravado was absent. Instead, there was an air of unease surrounding him. His eyes appeared slightly more expansive than normal, and his movements seemed almost overly swift, as if he were restraining something within. "Hey, Marcus, do you have a moment to chat?" he remarked, propping himself against the doorframe. "Absolutely, feel free to step inside," I responded, moving aside to allow him entry. He entered the room, yet unlike his typical relaxed self, he remained still, nervously toying with his phone. It was out of character for him. I arched an eyebrow, perplexed. "Is everything okay?" I inquired, placing my phone on the table and focusing entirely on him. He inhaled deeply, as if preparing to reveal a weighty secret. "I've been seeing someone," he finally confessed, his gaze fixed on me with intensity. I blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me, could you clarify that? Are you in a relationship with anyone?" I let out a laugh, initially doubting his words. Patrick was not the kind of person who would easily commit to a relationship. He cherished the freedom of being single, uncomplicated, and without commitments. Yet, on this occasion, there was a distinct change. "Absolutely, I encountered this girl. She goes by the name Carrie. She is truly exceptional." He pressed on, his voice softer, as if he were attempting to persuade not only me but also himself. "I have a strong affection for her. I genuinely care about her." That took me by surprise. "Are you kidding me?" I repeated, still grappling with the notion of Patrick being earnest about anyone. Yet the expression in his eyes revealed that he was not playing around. This felt unique. "Indeed." He nodded, a slight flush creeping across his face. "I understand it's quick, but I can sense it, you know? She is the one. I have feelings for her." I found myself at a loss for words. He was unlike anything I had ever witnessed before. It was unusual for Patrick to express himself in this way, particularly regarding something as significant as a relationship. Yet he continued to speak, moving back and forth in front of me, as if he were on the verge of bursting with his thoughts. "She's incredible, but I'm not sure, you know? I'm just worried," he expressed, his hands fidgeting anxiously as he spoke. "I want to ensure that her feelings for me match the depth of my own for her. Please take a moment to look into her for me." I blinked, uncertain if I had understood him right. "Hold on, what do you mean by take a look at her?" Patrick halted, his gaze fixed on me for an extended moment, as if he were attempting to decipher the expressions on my face. At last, he exhaled deeply and began to articulate his thoughts with deliberate slowness. "Just ensure that she's not deceiving me. Ensure that she isn't involved with anyone else or just playing games," he remarked, his voice tinged with a hint of embarrassment. "I mean it, Marcus. I have faith in you." I gazed at him for a moment, attempting to unravel the mystery of it all. This felt unusual. My closest companion requested that I keep an eye on his girlfriend to determine her fidelity. It seemed utterly unbelievable. Yet, I was acutely aware of the depth of Patrick's feelings for Carrie. His eyes revealed everything, and his words carried a weight of vulnerability that was palpable. I found myself at a loss for words. The request was peculiar, yet I understood that it was typical of Patrick. He wouldn't request my help with something like this unless it truly mattered to him. Following a lengthy silence, I let out a deep sigh. "Very well, then. I will take care of it." "Only because you're my guy," I mentioned. "However, this had better be worth the effort, my friend." Patrick's expression brightened with a sense of relief. "Thank you, Marcus. I knew you'd understand," he said, his voice taking on a gentler tone. I simply want to ensure that my efforts are not in vain." It was evident that he was having a hard time with it. He was filled with dread at the thought of being wounded, and despite his hardened facade, I could sense that this deeply affected him. I consented, though I couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty about what lay ahead. Before I realized it, I found myself strategizing my encounter with Carrie. Initially, I believed it would merely be a laid-back affair. I would take the time to understand her better, uncover some details, and determine if there were any questionable activities at play. I assumed it would be straightforward, merely a simple and innocuous checkup for my friend. As I got ready to meet her, a sense of unease began to creep in. This entire situation felt off to me in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I found myself uncertain whether it was the notion of observing her that troubled me, or the realization that I was entangled in a situation I had never intended to join. No matter what it was, I was certain of one thing. I was on the brink of encountering a moment that would alter the course of my life. I was completely unaware at that moment. The initial encounter I had with Carrie was rather unremarkable. Patrick had shared the specifics with me. She was set to visit a coffee shop in the town center later that week, and he hoped I could arrive around the same time to serendipitously encounter them. The strategy was straightforward: watch closely, engage in conversation, and determine whether she truly cared for Patrick or if she was merely enjoying the thrill of the moment, as many did at our age. I had no intention of inviting any drama into my life, yet I found myself utterly unprepared for what unfolded. I reached the cafe slightly ahead of schedule, eager to soak in the ambience and assess the surroundings. It was a cozy little spot, the sort of place where you could easily discover a secluded nook and enjoy your beverage while diving into a book or scrolling through your phone. The sun began its descent behind the towering structures, bathing the room in a soft, golden light that streamed through the expansive windows. I settled into a table at the back, aiming to remain inconspicuous. I aimed to avoid giving the impression that I was observing, since that wasn't my intention. This was meant to be laid back. I convinced myself that my purpose was simply to meet Patrick and his new girlfriend, to gauge the atmosphere of the moment. As they entered side by side, I hardly recognized Carrie at first glance. She was not as tall as I had envisioned from Patrick's tales. Height was of no consequence. It was her vibrancy, her self-assurance. Her smile was transparent, radiating a carefree spirit that seemed to embrace the world around her. Her laughter danced in the air, free and unburdened, as if she were perpetually the one leading the conversation. Patrick, conversely, appeared somewhat altered as well. The familiar laid-back, somewhat self-assured side of him appeared to have vanished. He wore a smile, certainly, but it appeared less than genuine. His gaze held a softness that spoke volumes about his feelings for her. There was an aspect of him I had never noticed before. I rose to my feet as they entered, gesturing for them to join me, attempting to appear nonchalant. "Hey everyone," I said, maintaining a warm tone, even though a hint of discomfort lingered in my gut. "How are you doing?" "Hey there, great to see you," Patrick remarked, extending his hand for a handshake. He appeared more joyful than I had noticed in some time, yet my gaze was fixed on Carrie, making an effort to remain discreet about it. She smiled at me, her eyes darting over me briefly, evaluating me as people often do when they seek to understand another. She had an undeniable charm, but my purpose here wasn't to evaluate her by her appearance. Not at this moment, no. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Marcus," she said, her voice gentle yet confident. Her politeness, coupled with a warm smile, enhanced her approachability. A sense of being ensnared in an unusual trial washed over me, as if I were on the brink of selecting allegiances in a silent conflict. We settled in, and initially, the dialogue flowed as expected. The encounter felt familiar, akin to any other initial introduction between a friend's partner and a guy assessing her suitability for their friend's confidence. I inquired about her background, her family, her interests, and other fundamental details. She responded to everything effortlessly, exuding warmth and engagement. Yet, there was an intriguing quality to her words that suggested I was being granted access to an unspoken truth, hinting at layers of meaning hidden just below the surface. I observed her stealing glances at Patrick, her eyes sparkling with delight whenever he spoke, chuckling at his jokes. Patrick was truly in his zone, and I could sense how he was becoming more enchanted by her with each fleeting moment. Yet, there was an unsettling quality to this that I couldn't shake off. Everything felt flawless, almost unreal in its perfection. It felt forced. It had an air of being practiced, in a way. I decided to let it go for a bit, opting to maintain a carefree atmosphere. As the dialogue unfolded, I began to notice subtle details that sparked my curiosity. As Carrie recounted a tale from her past, she expressed her fondness for the time spent with her ex. Her words came out effortlessly, devoid of any genuine feeling, as if she were merely stating a fact. It seemed as though they hadn't fully moved on from their previous relationships. Eventually, I found it necessary to step away. I had a sense of unease about the entire situation. I stepped into the bathroom to gather my thoughts, and as I gazed into the mirror, a question lingered in my mind: was I merely being paranoid, or was there something about her that felt off? Upon my return, I observed a subtle change in Carrie's body language. She found herself inching closer to Patrick, her hand gently resting on his arm. A delicate shift, yet it caught the eye. I observed her gaze upon him, the curve of her smile, and a sense of trespassing washed over me, as if I were interrupting a private exchange. It left me feeling uneasy. I locked eyes with her once more, and this time, the look on her face held me in place. It felt like she had a direct line to my thoughts, and her expression was anything but innocent. No, it was the kind of gaze that suggested she could see straight into your soul. We wrapped up our coffee, and the dialogue shifted to the familiar farewells, filled with assurances of reuniting in the near future. Patrick radiated happiness as we exited the cafe, and I couldn't help but observe how Carrie clung to his arm as they strolled out side by side. It felt as though she was asserting her ownership over him. Yet, as I made my way home, an unsettling sensation lingered, suggesting that something was amiss. Uncertainty lingered in the air, but I started to realize that Patrick wasn't the sole individual entangled in this unfolding situation. The question lingered: would I be able to unravel the mystery, or had I become so entangled that the truth eluded me entirely? The following days passed in a haze. Patrick was absolutely elated. Whenever I encountered him, he would share stories about Carrie, how they dined together, how they devoted a whole Sunday to each other, and how he was beginning to believe she could be the one. His words about her carried a unique weight, unlike any girl he had spoken of previously. It was hard to recall the last occasion when he had shown such seriousness towards someone, and I sensed it held significance for him. However, I found myself lacking that same sense of optimism. The deeper I delved into it, the more Carrie's actions began to linger in my thoughts. The way she would steal glances at me when Patrick was oblivious. The delicate exchanges that seemed far more charged than one might anticipate from someone who was ostensibly in a serious relationship. I still hadn't mentioned anything to Patrick. Was it really my place, though? I was merely meant to be a spectator. Yet, as silence stretched on, it became clear that I was no longer merely a spectator. A sensation was beginning to stir within me. A fragment of my being loathed itself for experiencing these emotions. She was with Patrick, who happened to be my closest friend. He relied on me for this, to assist him, to be the person who ensured everything was in order. But what if I were perceiving something that was merely a figment of my imagination? What if I were just conjuring illusions? Yet, an unsettling sense lingered within me, suggesting that there was something amiss with her. One evening, following a few days of absence from Carrie, I received a message from Patrick. He mentioned that he would be seeing her again, and that they planned to meet at a bar close to the city center. I had some free time, so I thought I'd drop in. I didn't have any significant doubts, yet my curiosity was impossible to ignore. A sense within me urged vigilance regarding this matter. I arrived at the bar, making an effort to conceal my true purpose of observing the scene. I settled into a seat at the far end of the room, ordered a drink, and made an effort to blend in with my surroundings. Patrick and Carrie sat at a table by the window, their laughter and conversation creating a world of their own, utterly engrossed in one another. Their interactions revealed a deep mutual attraction between them. Patrick's smile radiated warmth and sincerity, while Carrie appeared captivated by each word that flowed from his lips. However, a change began to unfold. As the evening unfolded, I observed Carrie scanning the bar with her gaze. She was lost in thought, her gaze distant and unfocused. She surveyed the room, her gaze pausing on a few newcomers who had just entered. It was understated, yet it caught my attention. At one moment, she rose to visit the restroom, while Patrick became absorbed in his phone. An ideal chance to delve deeper into observation presented itself. I picked up my drink and strolled past their table with an air of nonchalance. As I walked by, I caught a snippet of Carrie conversing with one of the bartenders. She was laughing, perhaps a bit excessively, if I'm being truthful. It was the sort of laugh that dances on the edge of charm, a playful attempt to captivate without revealing too much. The bartender appeared unfazed. He was offering her the same level of focus. I paused in my steps, feigning interest in the menu. My heart began to race. Is this what I was meant to seek? The subtle hints may have appeared insignificant at first, yet they were gradually accumulating. Her focus was not entirely on Patrick. Carrie returned to the table and settled into her seat beside Patrick. As she gazed at him, her expression transformed once more. Her smile appeared to lack authenticity, coming off as somewhat contrived, and she seemed preoccupied. Patrick remained oblivious. He remained deeply entangled in the notion of her, and I found it hard to fault him for that. She possessed beauty, intelligence, and, generally speaking, appeared to embody all that he desired. However, I realized that I could no longer overlook the small details. I found it impossible to resist. I had to find a way to have her to myself for just a brief moment. I made my way to the bar for another drink, and, as expected, there was Carrie, chatting with the bartender once more. I drew near, and she spotted me immediately. "Hello, Marcus." She welcomed me with that well-known smile. "Hello, Carrie." I responded, maintaining a warm yet cautious tone. I aimed to avoid appearing overly suspicious or confrontational. "How is everything unfolding this evening?" "Wonderful," she exclaimed a tad too hastily. "Simply savoring the evening." "You're familiar with the experience." Her eyes darted around the room once more, and for a fleeting moment, a hint of discomfort crossed her face, only to vanish as swiftly as it had come. I inquired if she would like to accompany me for a drink, and to my astonishment, she accepted. We both moved away from the bar and discovered a more secluded spot, hidden from Patrick's sight. The dialogue began light and easy, lacking any deep intimacy, yet as we continued to converse, I could feel her defenses gradually lowering. She was revealing more, perhaps excessively so if I were to be truthful. She spoke about her recent time with Patrick, describing how everything felt so ideal between them. Then, almost inadvertently, she revealed that there were other guys showing interest in her too, but she was still uncertain about what she truly desired. There it stood. The words I had long anticipated. The realization that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something amiss about her. She wasn't as committed to Patrick as she pretended to be. A knot twisted in my stomach. What am I meant to do now? Inform Patrick? Face her? I was unable to accomplish it. Not at this moment. I found myself completely immersed. I found myself compelled to continue this game, despite the boundaries beginning to fade. I intended to assist my friend, yet here I found myself entangled in the midst of everything. Perhaps you'll come to understand, I remarked, attempting to maintain a nonchalant tone, yet the phrasing fell short. Her gaze met mine, and I noticed the spark in her eyes. It felt like she had an uncanny understanding of my emotions. Perhaps, she murmured, inclining her head just a fraction too near. And that was the moment of realization. I was no longer merely observing her for Patrick. I was observing her for my own interest. The following days were steeped in an unshakable tension. I had been deceiving myself, convincing myself that my emotions for Carrie were merely a facet of my work, a duty to Patrick, yet I was deluding no one, least of all myself. Each time I encountered Carrie, an unexpected spark ignited within me, a connection that seemed out of place. What's even more frustrating? I was certain she sensed it as well. Her gaze revealed everything, even when she believed I was oblivious to it all. Patrick remained engrossed in his blossoming romance, sharing his excitement about a weekend getaway with Carrie and his desire to introduce her to his family. He was filled with joy, blissfully unaware in his conviction that everything was unfolding just as it should. I found it impossible to share with him the things I had witnessed, the sounds that had reached my ears. How might I? What if I made a mistake? What if I was simply overanalyzing the situation? Yet, there were instances when I could no longer ignore the reality. Just the other night, when Patrick and Carrie extended an invitation for dinner. I had consented to participate, yet my mind wandered from the discussion. I couldn't help but observe the way Carrie would gently flirt with me while Patrick was preoccupied with his order, how her hand would rest on my shoulder just a moment longer when she leaned across the table. Her smile would light up the room, as if we were the only two in on a delightful secret. I began to feel a sense of guilt simply for being in her presence, yet I found myself unable to pull away. We were nestled at a quaint table in the corner of the restaurant, the three of us sharing laughter over something amusing, yet my mind wandered elsewhere. Carrie's leg grazed mine beneath the table, and in that instant, my heart began to race. She danced with danger, and I was too entranced to step back. "How have you been, Marcus?" Patrick inquired, a smile playing on his lips as he gazed at me. "You appear somewhat removed this evening." I shook off my reverie and attempted to mask my distraction. "Just feeling a bit worn out, that's all." Yet Carrie observed me intently, her gaze no longer as pure as it had been before. It felt as if she had an understanding. She sensed my restraint, aware that I was grappling with an unacknowledged struggle. In that instant, it dawned on me that I had stepped over a boundary that was now irrevocable. Following dinner, we chose to stroll through the city, a custom the three of us had begun. It was meant to be enjoyable and carefree, yet my thoughts wandered off. Throughout the entire walk, Carrie remained close by my side, engaging in conversation that felt unusually personal. At one moment, we realized we were distanced from Patrick, who had paused to answer a call from his mother. Only the two of us remained. "You know," Carrie said, her voice gentle. "Lately, you've been on my mind quite a bit." I stood still, caught in a moment of uncertainty about how to reply. My heart raced within me, and I found myself torn between the fear of her words and the uncertainty of my own actions. "Could you clarify what you mean?" I succeeded in asking, making an effort to maintain a steady tone. "Text," she began, taking a moment to meet my gaze. "I find myself drawn to you in a way that's hard to explain. It's difficult to articulate, but it transcends mere casualness. Your presence ignites a spark within me, Marcus." Her words struck me with overwhelming force. In that instant, air seemed to escape me. Thoughts were swirling rapidly in my head. What was she expressing? Could it be that she was actually saying this to me? Did she experience the same magnetic attraction I felt? "You're with Patrick," I said, my voice trembling slightly more than I had hoped. "I understand," she murmured, moving nearer, "but that doesn't alter my feelings, and I can no longer pretend they don't exist." I took a step back, attempting to establish some distance between us, yet it proved to be a challenge. The connection we shared was unmistakable. It seemed as though the cosmos was weaving a tapestry that drew us closer, even though we were both acutely aware of the moral implications. "Text, you should talk to him," I urged, my words spilling out with a sense of desperation rather than mere suggestion. "I will," she said, though her voice wavered, hinting at her own doubts. I was at a loss for words in that moment. I never intended to become entangled in this, yet beneath the surface, I was aware that I already had. I found myself ensnared in a situation beyond my grasp. Patrick eventually joined us, and we continued the evening in quietude. Her words lingered in my mind, refusing to fade away. The intensity of her gaze lingered in my mind. The moment when our lips nearly met felt electric. The remorse consumed me entirely. I wasn't merely betraying Patrick in the capacity of a friend. I was deceiving my true self. The following days unfolded in a haze of uncertainty. I found it impossible to face Carrie regarding the incident, yet she lingered in my thoughts incessantly. Each time I laid eyes on her, an undeniable attraction enveloped me, a compelling force that continuously beckoned me closer. It transcended the physical realm, delving into the emotional, and I realized I was profoundly entangled. Patrick couldn't stop raving about the wonderful connection he had with Carrie, insisting that she was the one for him. He remained oblivious to the fact that she was beginning to distance herself from him, unaware that she had already sought out another for the attention she desired, and I found myself unable to reveal the truth to him. I couldn't bring myself to shatter what he possessed, despite my awareness that it was merely an illusion. Yet, the most disheartening aspect was that I began to sense it was all becoming insignificant. I found myself increasingly invested in Carrie, more than I was prepared to acknowledge. That evening, following an extensive dialogue within my own mind, I ultimately reached a conclusion. I needed to encounter Carrie once more. I needed to determine whether this was genuine or merely a figment of my imagination. The weight of this uncertainty had become unbearable. I sent her a message. May we have a conversation? Only the two of us. It holds significance. Her reply came in nearly an instant. Absolutely. And I sensed that a transformation was imminent, regardless of my preparedness for it. The instant I hit send on that message, I realized everything was about to change forever. I had ventured too far, and now I must confront the consequences of my actions. I found myself confronting Carrie, and in many respects, confronting my own reflection. The evening was serene as I encountered Carrie at the park. She occupied the very bench where we had experienced that charged moment just a few days prior. It was evident that she was feeling anxious as well. With her legs crossed and arms wrapped tightly around herself, she exuded a sense of introspection. Yet, there was an additional depth in her gaze. It felt as though she was poised, anticipating my next action, my words that could shift the entire dynamic. I approached her, striving to maintain my calm, yet my heart raced uncontrollably. The burden of guilt pressed heavily upon me, leaving me at a loss for words, both for her and for myself. Greetings. I remarked, settling into the chair beside her. Hello. She responded gently, her gaze locking with mine. She appeared less confident than she had in the past. Her expression hinted at a shared struggle, as if she, too, was grappling with the same thoughts. What exactly is this, Carrie? I inquired directly, cutting to the chase. My voice carried no anger, only weariness. Exhausted from the facade of normalcy when deep down, I recognized the truth. What transpired the other night? You're aware of what I mean. I cannot feign that it never occurred. It demands my attention. She averted her gaze for a brief moment, her teeth grazing her lip as she seemed to ponder her response. I felt compelled to connect with her, yet I understood that it wouldn't benefit either of us. She felt compelled to voice her thoughts, to articulate the turmoil that had been swirling in her mind. I'm uncertain. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. I suppose I simply couldn't resist. There was a certain feeling that enveloped us when we were in each other's company. It was clear that you felt the same way. However, I began to ponder it further. Regarding Patrick and the depth of my feelings for him. I have no desire to cause him pain, Marcus. However, I cannot deceive myself regarding my emotions. I allowed her words to resonate within me. They didn't quite align with my expectations, yet they were logical in their own way. She found herself suspended between two realms. Caught between her unwavering loyalty to Patrick and the undeniable bond we shared. I completely resonated with that emotion. I understand. I spoke in a softer tone now. However, it's important to grasp a certain point. This situation we find ourselves in, it simply isn't right. It seems unjust to Patrick. It simply isn't just for you. You're not being authentic, Carrie. Neither of us is. She gazed at her hands, a slow nod accompanying her thoughts. I understand, she murmured. I found myself in a state of confusion. I've been experiencing this sensation for some time now. Yet, I found myself reluctant to acknowledge it. I was hesitant to jeopardize my relationship with Patrick. However, I also didn't wish to continue the facade with him, or with you. I was at a loss, Marcus. I let out a deep breath. The burden of it all began to settle in on me. You're not alone in this. I can relate to that struggle as well. I never should have allowed it to reach this point. However, the reality is that I am not the one capable of resolving this issue. I can't be the one to decide for you. She lifted her gaze to meet mine then. Her eyes brimmed with bewilderment and doubt. What comes next? The inquiry lingered, suspended in the atmosphere. In that fleeting instant, I found myself at a loss for words. My attention had been consumed by the chaos we found ourselves in, leaving little room for contemplation on the necessary steps ahead. Yet, in that instant, clarity emerged. You must be truthful with Patrick, I insisted, my tone resolute now. It's important to express your emotions to him. If action isn't taken, the situation will only deteriorate further. I can no longer continue this charade with you, Carrie. That situation is unjust to him. It simply isn't just for either of us. She nodded once more, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't want to hurt him, she whispered, her voice trembling. I understand, I replied gently. Yet, you cannot continue to evade the reality that awaits. The pain will only intensify over time. We lingered in quietude for a spell, the gravity of our discussion enveloping us. Uncertainty loomed over what lay ahead for me, for Carrie, and for Patrick. Yet, I was certain of one thing. I could no longer evade the truth of the circumstances. Eventually, Carrie rose to her feet, shaking the dirt from her jeans. She looked at me, a melancholic smile gracing her lips. Thank you, Marcus, she murmured softly, for your honesty with me. I'm uncertain about my next steps, but I will find a way forward. I really need to have a conversation with Patrick. I am indebted to him for that. I nodded, feeling the weight of silence around me. There was no further dialogue, no additional actions left for me to take. The choice lay in her hands at this moment. As she turned to leave, a profound weight of conclusion enveloped me. I accomplished what was required of me, yet that didn't alleviate the difficulty. I had caused my friend pain, I had let him down, and I understood that whatever unfolded next, nothing would ever return to how it once was. The following days passed in a haze. I haven't received any word from Carrie or Patrick, and to be truthful, I wasn't sure what I was anticipating. I realized that my bond with Patrick had come to an end, and that Carrie and I could never return to the way things once were. We had traversed a boundary that was irrevocable, and now we were all compelled to confront the repercussions of our choices. A week passed before I finally received a message from Patrick. It was straightforward, merely a message, devoid of elaboration or harsh language. I would like to have a conversation with you. I was uncertain about the outcome of that conversation, yet I was certain of one thing. This chapter would close for all of us, and I couldn't help but wonder if any of us would emerge from it without scars.